The person to my left, before I introduce him, this goes back a ways. We've been friends for a long time. But before I introduce him, before we get going, it was in December of 2009. Hannah, my oldest, she was 3.5 months. And Kelly said, hey, John and Josh, I'm going to go out for the night with some friends, and you guys are in charge. And then Kelly did one of these jobbers. Okay, that's when I panicked. And at that point, I know, go ahead and judge me. I hadn't changed a diaper yet. I know, go ahead, send me an email. I'm not whatever. I'm not an engaged dad. Okay, well, I've gotten actually quite good at that. You can ask Hannah. But so Kelly hands me Hannah, and I look at Josh because he was visiting, and we're like, we're in trouble. And about 2 hours after that it happened, the diaper thing. And so it was very clear to everyone in the surrounding mile radius that there was a dirty diaper on our hands, and neither of us had no idea what to do. And we caught it on video. I watched it about 2 weeks ago. Josh is filming from like his phone or something, and it took us about an hour to change.
Easy.
Yeah, there may have been duct tape involved and some bungee cords, but we got the job done. And one of the things I was wrestling with in that moment was, Josh, are Kelly and I being bad parents for leaving a paying job to raise support for 3 years to try to plant a church in our neighborhood? And that was one of the biggest barriers to stepping out to start this. And Josh stood in that moment and sat with us in that moment and helped us wrestle through some major questions that lead us to today. And it is a huge, huge blessing for me to introduce you guys Josh Riebock. Let's give him a huge round of applause. Joshua. So I've been looking forward to this weekend, and today, let's just get started with, tell us a little bit about yourself.
A little bit. I'll tell you a little bit about me, and it's weird because, you know, someone comes and stands up here and talks to you about very personal things. It's probably only fair that I share some personal things with you first, right? I mean, that just seems right. So to do that, I'm actually going to show you what I think is called a montage of pictures. That's the only time I'm going to use that word, so enjoy it now. But I'm going to show you a montage of pictures, and the first one is of me back when I was actually living in the area. What's funny? Yeah, me. I'm the funny one. Does anyone want to just take a shot in the dark of which one I am? Yeah, see, it stinks because whenever you show an awkward pictures of it, no one's like, you're the handsome, cool guy that's destined for greatness. There's like, you're the awkward kid that's probably stuffed in lockers. But in this case, you're right. I'm the Harry Potter-looking gentleman in the front row. It's like hideous, and actually this was like my first school function. I went to a private school where we couldn't dance because that would lead to terrible things, and so we had functions, which were even more awkward because then you had to talk. And I had to go and get like a suit jacket, and so I went out, got the suit jacket, came up looking awesome, go to like the function, and someone comes up to me and they go, dude, you have shoulder pads in your jacket. And I'm like, yeah, what's up? It's awesome, right? He goes, no, that means you bought it in the wrong section. That's a lady's jacket. So I didn't exactly woo the heart of this junior high girl. But just to prove that God is still in the business of miracles, I actually did meet a girl one day that I fell in love with. I think this is a picture of her right here. So me and this girl grew up 5 houses apart from each other. And it wasn't until like 20 years later that I asked her out. So I don't know if there's anyone in here, any ladies pining for a certain gentleman in the room. But if you are, it might take him 20 years. So when you're 40, he'll be ready. It took me 20 years to ask her out, and I actually stopped for a long time showing. I travel and speak for a living. I write and speak, but I stopped showing pictures of my wife, all because someone in California had to go ruin it. I don't know what it is in the water out there, but they do some funky stuff. And one time I showed this picture, and the entire audience of ladies made this particular noise, and I'm betting that every single person in here knows what the noise is. If a girl sees something that's romantic or delicious or fuzzy or whatever, they all make this noise. And you know, sometimes people are like, how can you prove that, you know, in intelligent design? I think this is the most mighty proof. All right, I'm just gonna say something, and I want everyone in this room who knows what the noise I'm talking about is to make it. Okay, so romantic picture goes up and all the girls go, aww. See, you guys, there is a God. So I'm in California, I show this picture, and like, the whole crowd, all the girls go, right. And then I had this moment where, like, in my mind, I'm like, God, how come the guys don't have a noise? Like, I feel like we didn't get, like, we got the shaft. Like, God didn't trust us enough to steward that resource wisely. And I was like, so why didn't we get one? Well, in California, I found out what the noise is and why he didn't give it to us. See, this next picture coming up is actually a picture of my wedding. So all the girls go. Aww. And then off in like the misty, shadowy corner of the room, a man, probably with a mustache, probably in jean shorts, he goes, with my bride on screen, goes, yeah. And immediately I was just like, you know, just like, I was like, who are you? Like, is it wrong if the speaker punches someone in the crowd? Like, is that like an uncalled for? But so that, guys, that's why we didn't get it, because we would not know how to use it. We would blow it at the wrong time like this guy did. But that is my wife, or as in Texas they say, my wife. That's her. We've actually been married for 6.5 years. We got married and we had this idea. We were like, let's move. And sometimes I think God invites us to go do things, and then other times I think God just gives us the freedom to go do things. And Kristen and I were like, let's move somewhere, and she wanted to go to California, I wanted to go to Colorado, and instead we wound up in a place nothing like that, and that's Texas. So we actually moved to the city of Austin. I think this is a picture of Austin coming up. So a couple cool things about Austin. It's considered the live music capital of the world. The city slogan is actually Keep Austin Weird. It's progressive, it's liberal, it's nutty. It's the exact place I wanted to live my life. So Chris and I have actually lived there for 6.5 years. And it was after we had been there for a year, actually, that our first child arrived. So this is a picture of our son coming up. So, exactly, right? So this is our son now. Most parts of the country, this doesn't mean anything to them, but I have confidence in your leadership. And so I think this place is going to know what this means. Our son's name is Ditka. Yeah, see, like in some places of the country, they're like, what's a Ditka? And you're like, I'm questioning your salvation. So this is our son, Ditka. We don't have any human kids of our own. We're doing just fine with a canine one, but this is our son. This is a picture of our son. This next one coming up, hiding under a blanket saying peekaboo to his father. And then this next one coming up is a picture of him coughing up a fur ball on me. So that's really kind of like the nuclear family that we have down in Austin, and that's a little bit about me, and now you know.
There it is. There it is. All right, so we're yeah, you can clap for that. That's fine. That's fine. So we're going to dive right in. Your newest book is called Heroes and Monsters, and in chapter 1, you say this. I want to read it. You're standing at the corner of damned and divine. Explain to us what that means.
What does that mean? Yeah. Well, to do it, I'd like to tell you a couple stories, if that's okay, John. So, yeah, the title is Heroes and Monsters, and in this part, I say I'm at the corner of damned and divine, and here's kind of where those phrases came from. So, when I was a little kid, I was about 5 years old, and my mom did what my mom loved to do, which was volunteer me for things that I didn't want to do. And in this moment, she volunteered me for, like, the Christmas pageant. So, you know, I am forced into the Christmas pageantry at my little local church in rural Illinois. And I am set to deliver the opening address. Mm-hmm. So I'm supposed to go up there and really just captivate the crowd in my little 5-year-old body. And so my mom dresses me in like classic little boy formal gear. So I've got the bowl cut. It's just like, you know, across the forehead. I've got the elastic waistband khakis on. And then I've got the blue blazer with the brass buttons, so it like looks like I'm like the captain of a naval ship or something. And so I'm supposed to go up there, and I've got one line. That's all I got to say. It's like very simple. And they made it even easier for me. They say, okay, here's what you got to do, Josh. You got to go up there. Here's your line. And I'm supposed to say, I'm not very tall, but I welcome you all. So you see what they did there?
I do.
See, it rhymes. So that's all I have to do. And so the pageant comes, I go up on stage, and this is in like the early 80s, so it's like the 80s choir is behind me, so it's like turtleneck, perm, 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 like just, you know, backdrop of that. And then off to like the side, there's like the really like Bush League kind of live nativity, dad in bathrobe with like little giant candy cane and dog with donkey ears or whatever. So this is like the whole thing. And so I get up there, and I get ready, and I stand there, I'm ready to punch this thing, and I just go, and nothing comes out. And I freeze. And when you're a little kid, you don't realize that other people can see you. So I start like fidgeting awkwardly, thinking I can just, you know, like Houdini my way and ninja smoke ball vanish out of there. And so I'm really nervous. I don't know what to say. Nothing's coming. And now I just feel horribly afraid because all these eyes are just bearing down on me, and I'm frozen. And right when like the fear is kind of peaking, this gentleman in the front row, right where you guys are here, he stands up. And he starts walking up onto the stage. And this guy looks gigantic. And he like comes up, he steps onto the stage and like is so tall that he like blocks out the lights. It's like a human eclipse is like coming towards me. And then I see his face, and this man is my father. And my dad was about 6'4", about 240 pounds. He had a beard like from here to Gary, Indiana. So it's like he looked like a Civil War general. And my dad comes up onto the stage, and he stands next to me, and he puts his arms around me, and he like just pulls me into like his side. And then my dad gets down on his knees and looks out at the whole crowd, and he goes, "I'm not very tall, but I welcome you all." And like, the whole crowd just like kind of crumbled in this moment, because even though it was like a bit comical, everyone knew that like in that moment, my dad was my hero. It was like this glimpse of kind of a divine moment where my dad was rescuing me. And my dad was my rescuer as a kid. He was my hero, but my dad was also something else. See, a couple months after that first story, my parents and I and my two sisters, we were all going to go to this party. It was like one of these parent parties that kids hate to go to because there's nothing fun, but we were supposed to go. And so my mom and sisters went ahead of us, and my dad and I were going to, meet them there. And so I'm at home, and I'm playing Nintendo, and my dad is sitting in his lazy boy chair. I hear my dad get up out of his chair. He walks into the kitchen, and then he walks back carrying this big case of beer. And he sets it down on the little end table, and then I hear, from behind me that unmistakable noise of a can opening, and my dad downs his first beer. Then a couple minutes go by, and I hear that noise again, and he downs another one, a couple minutes, and another one, and another one, and another one. And it wasn't strange to see my dad drink. My dad was an alcoholic. He drank all the time. But what was strange was what happened next, because after my dad drank the entire case of beer, he got up and he walked towards me. And he tried to, I think, say, "Hey, it's time to go," but it's pretty incoherent at that point. So he kind of awkwardly grabs me by the arm and picks me up, and we walk out to the car. My dad is stumbling around, and he kind of forcefully jams me into the passenger seat, doesn't buckle me up, and he gets behind the wheel, and then we take off driving. And, normally my car rides with my dad were fun. It's like he'd sing, he's kind of like entertaining me, really trying to just capture my attention. But this time it's like he wasn't even there, And we're driving out kind of in these dark country roads of Illinois. And my dad, he was just too drunk. And finally, we reached this turn that was too sharp, and we didn't make the turn. And the car went flying off the road. And we smash into this wooden fence, and we go right through it, and we start plowing out into this cornfield. And me as a little boy, it's like I'm squeezing this seatbelt that I buckled myself so tight, it's like I feel like my fingers are going to explode. And all I see is all these corn stalks flying by. And finally, we ram into this big mound of dirt. The car comes to a stop. My dad passes out over the steering wheel, and I go, "Where is the man that is my father?" It's like this guy is not my hero, but I know that somewhere inside that man is. But this is someone else. This man is a monster. It's like where that other glimpse of my life is so divine, this one is so damned. And really what this whole book is about is how that damned and divine, heroic and monstrous reality exists inside not just my father, but every single person on the planet. Really, this book is about how that exists in me, that tension of good and evil. I mean, even the Bible, says this is in every person. Like Paul, who wrote a lot of the New Testament in Romans, it's like this epic letter, and it's super eloquent, and there's a lot of like fancy language. And he's writing it, and I imagine him in like his little Paul lair or whatever. He's got his little Paul desk and like his picture of his family on the wall or whatever. And he's got his little quill, and he's writing all this amazing stuff, and it's very controlled and very composed. But then he gets to Romans chapter 7. And I think you actually talked about this a couple weeks ago up here. But in Romans chapter 7, Paul starts it's like he starts to get out of control as a writer. It's like his pace picks up. And he goes, "I don't understand myself. Because the things I want to do, I don't do. And the things that I don't want to do, I end up doing." It's like Paul is saying in so many words, my heart is split, damned, and divine. And at any one moment in time, I could go either way. I actually imagine Paul getting so frustrated while he's writing that he like throws his pen, but it's a quill pen. So it just like floats down, mocking him on the way. But it's like even Paul felt this tension of damned and divine, hero and monster that I saw in my dad and that I see in me all the time, and that's really what it's about.
Now, It's clear you have a passion for this, passion for language, writing, speaking. But when we met, that's not what you were doing full time. So how did you get into this?
Yeah, so when John and I first met, I was a youth pastor, and I was like the worst one ever. So whoever you guys hire or have or whatever, they're amazing compared to me. But I was a youth pastor for 5 years, and it was actually kind of simple in the way that I was at my desk one day. My solitaire score wasn't that good, so I was frustrated. And I thought to myself, I don't think I want to do this for a living. Like, I don't think this is what I'm wired to do. I mean, is this how I'm going to spend the next 2 decades of my life? And I asked myself the question, if I could do anything with my life as a job, what would I do? And the answer was obvious. Lead guitar for Guns N' Roses.
Yes.
But I knew, okay, well, that's tough to get.
Very
it's tough to
gig.
get. And so I thought, well, what else? And I really realized if I could do anything with my life, I'd become a writer. That's what I would do. I wouldn't go to an office. I wouldn't work on a staff. All I would do, I would just write and speak and tell stories. I felt like it's the only thing I was good at. And as a little side note, I think one of the ways we all heal in life, I think oftentimes we think that God wants to make us into something we've never been. And part of that's true. But I think a lot of times what God wants to do is return us to what we once were. Innocent, loving, trusting, welcoming, passionate dreamers. All these things that you see in kids. And for me, I felt God wanting to take me back to this little boy that loved to write. And so, in a matter of, a couple weeks, I decided I'm going to go for it. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to live the dream. I'm going to try to become a writer. And what made it difficult was that one of the things was that people kept asking me, is this what God wants you to do? Like, is God calling you to this? And I'm a Christian. I know we're all on different points in here, but I'm a Christian. And I think in the moment what I wanted to say was, yes, I have total clarity. There's no doubt. Oh, the certainty is just pouring down like manna. But the honest answer was, does God want me to become a writer? Maybe. You probably, I don't know, maybe you didn't feel that way, but even coming here, it's like, God, I think, but I don't know. And I think that's something that can cripple us in life, is needing the sense of certainty. But there's a story that has changed my perspective on how God interacts with us in the midst of these choices, especially when we're not sure. So there's a little boy, and this little boy's out in his backyard, and he has this brand new fire truck, red and shiny and all its glory or whatever. And he's out there playing with his fire truck, and from inside the house, he hears his dad calling him. So immediately the kid who just wants to be near his dad drops the fire truck, goes awkward little boy running into the house, opens the screen doors looking for his dad, runs into the kitchen, Dad, where are you? Dad, where are you? He can't find his dad. He runs in the dining room, Dad, where are you? Dad, where are you? Can't find him. Runs up the stairs looking for his dad, finds his dad in the bedroom in his dad lazy boy chair reading the newspaper. So the little boy runs up to the newspaper, pulls it down, and says, Dad, I heard you calling me, so I came running, here I am. The dad takes the newspaper, sets it aside, picks the little boy up on his lap, and slaps him across the face as hard as he can. He looks at his son as he says, don't you dare come running to me unless you're absolutely certain that it's me who called you. Now down the street, there's another little boy, and he too has a fire truck. And he's out there playing with it, and he loves this fire truck. And from inside the house, he hears his dad calling him. So he leaves the fire truck. He runs into the house, looking in all the rooms. Dad, where are you? Dad, where are you? Can't find him. Finally goes upstairs, finds his dad in the bedroom in his dad lazy boy chair, reading the newspaper. He goes up, pulls the newspaper down, said, Dad, I heard you calling me, so I came running. The dad sets the newspaper aside, picks the little boy up on his lap, and he says, Son, I didn't call you. But the fact that you came running when you thought I called you brings me so much joy. So for me, leaving my job, it was a question of who do I believe God to be? Is it a God who gets angry that I can't discern his voice perfectly? Or is it a God who takes so much joy in the fact that I want to go when I think he's calling, even if I'm wrong? And for me, I said, I know God's the second father. I'm going to quit, and I know he's going to be proud of me.
Wow, that's awesome. Tell me about chapter 1. So I opened this thing up, got it right when it came out, and instantly I met with this person named Jack. Tell us about Jack. Why
What's
Jack?
The deal,
yeah,
yo?
Yeah.
So Jack, in the story here, in this book, Heroes and Monsters, Jack is actually the God character. If you read this book, you will not find the word Jesus. You will not find the word God. This character, the divine character, is named Jack. And people ask a lot, they're like, why would you do this? This is so weird. And I'm like, I know it is weird. Isn't it awesome? Some people agree, some people don't. I love the weirdness of it, so that's part of why I did it. But a bigger reason is I grew up in and around church. And so I've been around the language of church and the images of God all the time. And I find that what we often do is when we're trying to describe God to people, or when we're conversing about God, we always use the exact same images, the exact same metaphors, the exact same language. And what we do is, in creating limited pictures, we limit who God is. We limit our own concept of God by the way that we talk about him. And so I wanted to tell my life story using a completely different image of God, a completely different picture of God, all describing Jesus, because I wanted to shatter this idea that God is this thing that we have figured out that fits into the box that makes us comfortable. The other part of that too, though, is I have discovered while living in Austin that if we're always using the same language to talk about God, we're only making God accessible to a certain group of people who can access that particular language. I think if you're a Christian in this room, I think one of the ways that we become a part of healing in the world is to be creative enough to dialogue and talk about God outside the ways that we usually do it. So that's why I did it.
All right. So let me hop down to chapter 4, all right? So chapter 4, within chapter 4, and for those of you who are wondering, this is chapter 3 and then chapter 4, and I couldn't put it down. It was awesome. Chapter 4, Mr. Wrinkle-Free points to a pool. Give us a context of what is taking place and what transpired. Yeah.
So I graduated from high school somehow. It's crazy, but I graduated when I was 18, and then I went on what I call my college extravaganza. You're like, oh, let's try this for a while. Okay, 1.6 GPA. That's not great. Let's try somewhere else. And so I ended up hopping colleges and colleges and colleges, and as I moved through this whole, I guess, like young adult experience of my life, by this point I'd grown really, really jaded towards God, really jaded towards anything about Jesus, spirituality. I was an angry person. And so I had really shoved God out of my life. I'd shoved my dad out of my life. I'd shoved my family out of my life. And when I turned 21, I moved to Colorado. And I get there, and I meet this group of guys. One of the guys' name is Ben, and one of the guys' name is Ralphie. And we call, his name isn't really Ralphie, but we called him that because he looks like that little kid in the bunny suit in the Christmas Story. So we just called him Ralphie. We're like, sorry, dude, stinks to be you, but you look like him. And so I become friends with these guys. And these guys were really different than anyone I had ever known, because these guys loved me. They embraced me. They didn't try to fix me. They just welcomed me. But the other piece to them was these guys were passionate about God. And I want to be real clear about this, because as a Christian, like I said, which I am, I think oftentimes our greatest passion isn't God. I think it's being perceived as godly. My passion, I really had a good week if people in my community, my neighbors, think I'm a godly guy. And whatever, it's all well and good, but at the end of the day, I believe God invites me to be passionate about him. And when I met these guys, they loved God in a way I'd never encountered before. Like one morning, one of the guys, came into my room. It's 10 o'clock or whatever. And he, wakes me up. It's a Sunday morning. He's like, come on, dude, it's time to go. And I'm like, bro, the sports bars don't open for 2 hours. We got plenty of time. Tables will be available. And he's like, no, church. And I, kind of laughed. I was like, oh, yeah, is that like a new bar in town? Or that sounds cool, And so he's like, no, I want to take you to church. And I'm like, man, that's not my thing. And he's like, look, just come with me. I'm not saying you need to believe it, but it matters to me. Would you come with? And so, they were constantly doing that. They weren't telling me where I was wrong. They were just saying, look, we just want to spend time with you. We care about you. Well, eventually these guys invite me on this retreat. I don't know if you've ever been in a church retreat before, but they're awesome and terrifying at the same time. And I get invited on one of these church retreats, and it's for all the new students at this college, and I'm the transfer senior, so it's me and all the little munchkin freshmen or whatever. And so I go on this retreat, and it's like most retreats, Friday night session, Saturday morning session. Afterwards, you go to your little cabins or whatever and talk it out, cry it out, hug it out, the whole deal. And so we get to the Saturday night session, this is when the churches always blow it out, And we get there, we all walk into the auditorium, and the speaker is on stage. He's like, all right, tonight's going to be great, but we're not going to do it in here. He's like, tonight, we're going to do the session by the swimming pool. And so he leads all 100 of us or whatever, and this retreat is happening on a mountain in Colorado. So he leads us through the woods, and like out to this swimming pool. And right when we get there, because I've been in church enough, I go, I know where this is going. Oh my gosh, this is like the ultimate unpredictability. This is like the Sixth Sense. We get it. He's dead. I understand. It's like, I'm like, I know what you're doing. This is totally going to be about baptism. And so he gets out there, and I don't know, like, pastors have like this magical power. And what they have this ability to do is like when they're speaking outside, it's like all of a sudden like a fog will roll in. And so like this guy like starts speaking and like a solitary leaf comes like spinning down and like lands on the water. It's like, Jesus, like, and so he's like giving this like, talk, and he's talking about it all, and he gets to the end, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is about baptism. I'm not going to do this. This is so dumb. And he like finishes up, and he's like, okay, you heard what I said? Who wants to get baptized? And immediately I go, not me. Not me, because all this is a hollow tradition. And if there's no God that I believe in behind it, which I don't, then there's no point. Like, I'm tired of participating in things just to make my outside look good that don't actually transform my inside. This is a waste of time. And further, no one's going to do this, Mr. Speaker guy. We're not going to get hoodwinked by your little scheme here. And so there's that, like, awkward lull where he's like, who wants to get baptized? And no one moves. And it's, like, super awkward, like on a first date. And you're just like... And then finally, someone stands up, and it's this girl. And just to really capture where I am in the moment, this girl is walking up to get baptized. So, like, to meet Christ or whatever. And as she's walking up, I'm like, well, she's good looking. I'm just like, hey, when you're done with Jesus, want to hang out with me? Like that whole deal. And so she goes up, and I'm like kind of trying to take this whole thing in, and he takes her down to the water, the speaker does. And he takes her down beneath the surface and pulls her up. And when he pulls her up, arms in the air, she's celebrating, crying. She's like, yes. And all of a sudden, I was like, what just happened? Like, I feel like I've just seen something beyond skin deep. Like, something just happened there. I don't know what it was, but I just saw something. And so the speaker goes, does anyone else want to get baptized? And I'm like, nope, because God, you're not real. It's funny. For all of us in this room, we struggle with different concepts and different dimensions of this God conversation. And for some of us is God loving? For some of us, is God forgiving? For some of us, it's, if God exists, how can whatever? For me, the question was, is God real? Because I sat there going, you know what? If the Bible is real and God's not, it's an irrelevant book. If the church is real, but God's not real, it's nothing more than a building. If I believe in the Bible but not God, a few things in my life have to change. If I believe that going to church is a nice idea, a few things have to change. But if I believe God is real, everything has to change. Wow. Like, there's no way I can claim God is real and not have my life completely overhauled. And I was just too afraid to do that. So I'm sitting there going, I'm not getting baptized, and surely now no one else will. And then this guy stands up. And I remember very peculiar details about everything. And all I remember about this guy is he had these massive legs. And so he's walking to the front, and I'm like, you're either a soccer player or like part dinosaur. And so he goes up to the front, the speaker takes him, boom, into the water, pulls him up, same thing, celebrating, and then that's when I feel it. And some of you will know what I mean. For some of you, this is going to sound really far out, but if you're going to believe in God, you got to get pretty far out. Because in that moment, it's like I feel what I can only describe as this invisible hand inside my chest, squeezing my heart, going, hey, this whole baptism thing, it's not just for them, it's for you. And Josh, I know you think your life sucks and you think it's been hard and you think I want nothing to do with you, but I'm not just for all these other people, I'm for you. And then like, I'm like, what the... You look around, see if anybody else felt it or whatever. And I'm like, no. This is not God. You don't exist. And then you start arguing with the being that you say doesn't exist. And he's like, oh, if I don't exist, why are we talking? What's up? It's like up in the clouds. It says, you got served. So I'm like, this can't be real. This can't be real. And then all of a sudden, all these other people start standing up, and it's like 3, 4, 5, 6 people are getting baptized. And I feel this hand going, Josh, I'm for you. You've been fighting me for so long. Just stop fighting. Stop fighting. I'm not against you. Stop fighting. And the speaker stands there after a few more baptisms, and he goes, does anybody else want to get baptized? And I dug my heels in, and I said, no. I cannot believe that you're real. I cannot accept that. So everybody got up and everybody went away. You know, the speaker dismissed everybody and everybody goes back to their cabins and I'm left sitting there at the pool by myself. And it's funny because I think in that moment I felt like I had, with that kind of defiance, gone to a place spiritually to which, you know, from which there was no coming back. I don't know, maybe you guys have been there where you feel like you did something or accepted something or didn't do something and you felt like you had now gone beyond the reach of God. And that's really how I felt. And I sat there for a while, and then finally I had this, I guess, decision where I said, you know what, God? I have talked to everybody else about whether or not you're real, but I haven't really talked to you. And would I be bold enough? Would I be willing to take that risk to find out if you're real or not? And so I wander off into the woods, and the way it's described in the book, I describe how it felt. But how it felt is that this character, Jack, or God, really walked through the woods and stepped right in front of me, and the moonlight caught his face, and when I saw him, it's like he said, "You still think I'm not real?" And in my heart, I freaked out as I'm having this conversation with God, and I end up actually laying down in the dirt, crying and sobbing and wrestling with God, and it's like he just told me to stop fighting, and I don't really understand how it happened. I believe that when we actually encounter Christ, eventually words fall short, and that if we can sum it up perfectly, then, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it, you know? And so I just know that laying in the dirt on a mountain, I went, this stuff is real, yo. and I believed, and I knew what I had to do first. And so I stood up, and I was like, holy cow, I believe this. And I went running through the woods back to my cabin. I was afraid of spider webs, so I'm running like this. And I get to my cabin, and I bust the door open. I see all my roommates on the floor, and I've got like the crazy, you know, the Jack Nicholson eyes. I'm like, you know, looking around, and I see this guy, Dave, and Dave's 3 years younger than me, and I run up to him like a charging bull, and I go, you have to baptize me. And Dave looked at me like I just asked him to get married or something. I mean, he was like, I don't know, okay. And it's so funny, he's like, no, I can't. And I was like, you have to. And he goes, Josh, I've never baptized anyone. I was like, that's okay, I've never been baptized. This is perfect. And so I was like, Dave, I believe, will you please baptize me? And so Dave, you know, he goes, yeah. And so he gets our roommates, and we all go walking up this hill together. We get to the pool, and Dave takes me into the water. And for me, it's like I just sensed this very real, tangible presence of God who wasn't far away, who was for me right in the water. And, you know, Dave's flipping through his Bible looking for something to say. It's like he ends up reading, like, the introduction, like, copyright, okay, hallelujah, bro, whatever. You know, I don't know what he read, but I remember the heart of what he said, and, like, really the message, what I heard from Dave that night was, Josh, because for the first time you believe God is real, that you believe that he really loves you, that he's really with you, that he's really for you, I baptize you. And he took me down. And when he pulled me up, just like all those other folks I'd seen like an hour earlier, I was just like, yes! I was like, this is so epic. And I came up celebrating, and then all my roommates who were there started doing cannonballs down into the water. It's like, you know, Animal House baptism or whatever. And so then they all come around me, and they prayed for me. And when I look at my life, I was near Jesus for a long time. But that's the night that I met him.
So connect that back to the impact that had on you and your dad.
Yeah, so my dad's and my relationship dissolved pretty quick after that car incident. It's like the man that I loved, I was now so afraid of, you know. And I pushed him away, and he became more and more kind of vacant. And even after he went through AA, and eventually he got really sick, and he kind of started to pursue me, I was too afraid of wandering back into the origins of this wound, which I think is pretty common for a lot of us. You know, we don't want to go back to the place that seems to have marked our life so horribly. And I did not want my dad in my life, but I knew after I had kind of had this encounter with God, I knew that was the very place God would probably want to take me most. It's like I couldn't deny the fact that when Jesus and the disciples were like, Jesus, where do you want to go? He's like, I got it. Let's go to a graveyard. Let's go to the places of like biggest brokenness, biggest shame, biggest pain. And I knew he would want to take me into that place in my life. And it was the one place I didn't want to go. And I think for all of us, we tend to have that one place that we rope off. And we say, God, don't take me there. God, you can take me to Africa. God, you can take me to space. God, you can take me to those people. But don't take me to that place in my own heart. And I did not want to go back to my dad, but I knew I wanted the healing in that place. And so I was still living in Colorado, and I called my dad one day, and I mean, I'm still kind of ashamed of it, because he was surprised to hear from me, which is terrible. It's like, that's how infrequently I'd been communicating. But he answers the phone, and he called me Blast, which is a nickname he had given me. And it's like it transported me back to being this little boy who wanted his dad, you know. And he goes, "Hey, Blast, how are you?" And I knew if I dragged my feet, I wasn't going to get it out. And so I just had to get right into it. And I, you know, in language much more colorful than I'll use here today, I said, "Dad, you have messed up my life in ways you're never going to understand. And you've hurt me in ways that you will never comprehend. But I know that the way I've been towards you, I have hurt you in ways I will never understand. And I have messed up your life in ways I will never comprehend. Dad, I forgive you, and will you forgive me?" And on the other end of the phone, you know, I just hear my dad kind of crumble into tears, and he's just saying, oh my God, I want that. And, you know, like, I didn't stay on the phone much longer. It felt like the whole moment was radioactive and that, like, something could go wrong. And I was like, okay, you know, we got off the phone. And it's not like after that it was all, like, perfect and that he was, like, giving me noogies and making lemonade for us or anything like that. I mean, it was like, it was so hard. It was like I needed to forgive my dad in order to heal with him, but in order to find my own healing. But I need to forgive my dad the next day and the next day and the next day. I find that the most persistent wounds in our lives don't go away in the blink of an eye. And that God says, yes, I'll heal you from that today, and I will heal you from it tomorrow, and I will heal you from it the day after that, as long as you continue to invite me to go with you into these spaces. And my dad and I had 6 good years, you know, not perfect, but good years before he died.
Yeah, and you, in your book, you talk about a lot of painful things that you've walked through and how those things have shaped you. Just share some of those with us.
Yeah, so my dad died in 2007, just June 22nd, 2007. It was actually right after I quit my job to become a writer. And then actually 10 weeks later, my mom died very suddenly. And so I went from being this relatively new husband with a great job to an unemployed dream chaser with no parents who felt like his life fell apart. And processing that, the things with my dad, and a lot of even the personal things that, you know, I've done to myself. You know, I've had a lot of pain, but that's not unique to me, you know. I mean, I know that every single one of us could probably sit up here today and talk about wounds and scars and pain and struggles and difficulties. And one of the things that I certainly find how pain has shaped me is when I'm willing to voice it and someone looks me in the face and they go, me too, it reminds me that I am not alone. But so often I swallow that pain down and stick it back in some closet of my heart, and then I feel alone. So that's, pain is unifying for one. Another thing about pain, though, and that's where I think the real beauty comes, and I learned this in a conversation I had a few years ago. I met with this guy out in California, which I don't know why I keep going to California, but people are good, weird and good. And I got to meet with this guy, and if you've seen Back to the Future, he looks like Doc Emmett Brown, Christopher Lloyd. So he's like the long white sweeping hair or whatever. And I met with this guy, and he's a global artist consultant, which, you know, Ghostbuster, I don't know. And so, you know, I sit with this guy, and at one point in our conversation, he asked me this question. He goes, Josh, what's your unfair advantage in life? And I process advantage, so I start trying to kind of guess what he's talking about. I go, oh, I know my unfair advantage. Okay, unfair advantage, I totally have this down. I was raised in like a middle-class family. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but, my parents were, relatively around. I got 2 great sisters. I'm a writer. I get to travel. I have this amazing wife. she plays fantasy football, so that's a total advantage. I'm kind of reeling off all these things. I'm like, that's it, right? And with every single thing I say, he's like, no, that's not an advantage. No, that's not an advantage. And so after he says no like 30 times, I'm like, my life is terrible, according to you, apparently. He keeps saying no, and I kind of give up. I run out of things, and I go, well, my dad, my dad was an alcoholic. My parents were hoarders. I still struggle to believe in God. My parents died. I'm going through the 12 steps. And I get to this end of this little run. He goes, oh, that's it. And I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? How is that an unfair advantage? And he looks at me and he goes, all that pain. He goes, all that stuff that you deal with, he goes, that's exactly how God will shine brightest in your life through those things. He looks at me and he goes, Josh, do you think people care? Do you think people are going to go, hey, I want to hear what this guy has to say because he went to a private school. Hey, I want to hear what this guy has to say because they are a 2-car family. Hey, I want to hear what this guy has to say because his wife is beautiful. He's like, you know why people will want to hear you? He said, because of the things you've had to endure. And he looked at me and he says, Josh, when you take your pain and you're willing to offer it to God, it becomes the biggest advantage in advancing the kingdom because it will become the mightiest parts of how God has worked in your life. He said, if you are willing to take those things and say, God, what can you do with this? God will say, I will do more with that than any other part of your life. The most broken and painful parts, I will heal those parts more than any part of your life if you're willing to put them in my hands. It's through pain, I guess I've realized that pain is too precious a thing to waste.
Well, man, I actually remember, I think we were on a phone call shortly after that conversation. I'll never forget that. You talking about this guy and how that was just such a breakthrough. And, having a fairly front row seat. I remember right after your parents died, us having a conversation and praying together over the phone and seeing the way that you have walked through this and continue to walk through this, continue to say, hey, I need healing as much as the next person. It brings us to the way that we want to kind of bring today to a conclusion, which is the communion table. And our band's going to come up and kind of play some music here in a second, but will you just lead us in communion and talk about what this means to you, what this can mean to us this morning?
Yeah, so we are going to take communion, and I guess there's so many ways I can think about what it means that we're, symbolically partaking in who Jesus was through bread and wine, or, the other side of the metaphor, his body and his blood. But I guess one thing that communion always reminds me of is that I'm a broken man, and that God was willing to become a broken man so that I might heal. And it's through the brokenness of Christ that I ultimately find healing. And I think it always brings me back to this place that in my brokenness, God brings me healing too. So we have 2 tables up here and 1 in the back. As the band plays, you're free to get up and take it at any time. Let me pray. God, thank you for this day. Thank you, Lord. God, thank you that you hear the cries of people who need healing. God, thank you, Lord, that you are a God of healing, Lord. God, that healing never seems to come in the ways we think it will. Sometimes, God, it's almost more painful at first. God, I just pray for all of Mission Church. God, in the communities around here, the 10, Lord. God, I pray that we would be eager participants in the healing you want to pour out. God, I pray that we would not fight you in our own healing. We love you, Lord. Thank you for what you've done. Amen.